t-shirt?
Yes.
A bit of it, yeah.
Super granddad.
We can see up to Christ.
Because I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.
Yeah.
And then you get the Philippians. Okay, Matthew. We're in Matthew 13. Does anyone remember from last week what we were talking about? Who got the most points?
If he did.
It was us.
Yeah,
it was them because they are lions.
It was a tie, wasn't it? Nobody got more than 2. So, what was the parable though?
I've had a sleep.
Sowing the seed.
Oh,
We were here sowing the seed.
so okay, sowing the seeds. What sort of seeds?
Oh, it's the weeds.
Weeds and the weeds.
The
The weeds and the wheat. Well done. Weeds and the wheat. So the next parable starts at 31. 31 of Matthew chapter 13, verse 31. He, Jesus, told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree so that the birds come and perch in its branches. Okay? It's a 2-verse parable about what?
Mustard seed.
The kingdom of heaven.
And the faith.
Sorry?
And faith.
Yeah. So it's a real short one, and we don't get any explanation as to what it means. So we've gone from the parable of the sower, where you get full explanation, the parable of the wheat and the weeds, where you get short explanation, to this parable, where you get no explanation at all as to what it means. And what you have to bear in mind when you think about this parable, Jesus, imagine you were just back in the day and Jesus was just speaking to you, and you're part of the crowd, and you hear it for the first time. Nobody else talks in the Bible about the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven. Edward, please be quiet. Thank you. The kingdom of heaven. And Jesus starts giving parables about this thing called the kingdom of heaven. What is the kingdom of heaven? People will be asking. And Jesus says, well, the kingdom of heaven is like a sower who went out, and we did that one. The kingdom of heaven is like somebody who planted wheat in a field, and then an enemy came along and planted weeds. The kingdom of heaven, we're just reading here, is like the seed of a mustard seed. Yeah, mustard seeds are really tiny seeds. Now, you've probably not seen mustard seeds, but has anyone seen pine cones?
Yes.
You know what a pine cone looks like?
Yes.
And when it opens up, when it's closed, nothing happens, does it? But when it opens up, you shake it, tiny little seeds come out. Really small ones. And if you plant one of those tiny seeds, it grows into a huge pine tree. I mean, some of them are huge, like sequoia trees in America. Has anyone been to America? Seen the sequoia trees? I have. You can't see them in this country because the Victorians like planting them as well. They're the really, really, really tall pine trees. And Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like that. It's like a tiny seed, and when it's planted, it grows into a huge tree. And the tree's so big that the birds of the air can nest in it. That's how big it is. And because we don't have an explanation, we have to look elsewhere in the Bible for an explanation of what this means, what a tree means. Hey, I got there. Daniel chapter 4 and starting at verse 10. Daniel chapter 4 and starting at verse 10. These are the visions I saw while lying in bed. I looked, and there stood before me a tree in the middle of the land. Its height was enormous. The tree grew large and strong, and its top touched the sky. It was visible to the ends of the earth. Its leaves were beautiful, its fruit abundant, and on it was food for everybody. Under it the wild animals found shelter, and the birds lived in its branches. From it every creature was fed. Does that sound similar to the tree that Jesus is talking about? It's got birds in it, it's very big. Okay, so it's a similar vision, isn't it? A very similar vision. So let's read on a little bit further. In verse 13, in the vision I saw while lying in bed, I looked, and there before me was a holy one, a messenger coming down from heaven. He called out in a loud voice, cut down the tree and trim off its branches, strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from under it and the birds from its branches, but let the stumps and its roots be bound with iron and bronze, remain in the ground in the grass of the field. Let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and let him live with the wild animals among the plants of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let him be given the mind of an animal, till 7 times have passed for him. The decision is announced by messengers. The holy ones declare the verdict, so that the living may know that the Most High is sovereign over all of the kingdoms of the earth, and gives them to anyone he wishes, and sets over them even the lowest of people. So this dream of a tree, which is very similar to Jesus' tree, was given to a king called Nebuchadnezzar. Does anyone know, for a point, which kingdom he was king of? Nebuchadnezzar was the king of...
The only thing that's coming to my head is the shipping matrix.
No, nothing to do with the shipping matrix. That was called the Nebuchadnezzar.
Nebuchadnezzar want it.
Annette, do you know? He was a king of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar was a king of Babylon. Sorry, I didn't see your hand go up.
No, he was going to say Egypt.
Egypt, okay.
Isn't he the guy who threw the 3 guys into the furnace to test their trust in God?
Different Nebuchadnezzar. Basically what happened was, just to explain, everybody since the first Nebuchadnezzar was called Nebuchadnezzar. So it's a bit like you take the title of the name on with you. So a bit like Caesar, you know Caesar? There was one called Caesar, but they all called Caesar after that. Only the first one was really called Caesar, Julius Caesar. And then they're all Caesar, 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 Caesar. So it's the same, Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar. And this is a guy, we think it's a guy called Nebuzarin, was his real name, called Nebuchadnezzar. But Nebuzarin. And we know from history that he did go mad. He was mad for a while, and his son reigned for a period of time whilst he was mad. A bit like King George. Everyone remember George III?
Yeah,
They were mad.
he chopped before he started. Yeah, because...
George
But
did.
that was Henry.
That was Henry, yeah. George didn't do that. He was just mad, and his son George IV reigned Prince Regent, so he called it the Regency period. So anyway, let's get back to this story. So the king has this dream. He has a dream that there's a tree, a big, powerful tree, birds of the air in it, everything going right for this tree, fruit on it, animals shading underneath it, everything going good for this tree. And then someone from heaven comes and says, chop it down, cut it down. Oh, cut it down. And so he's puzzled by this dream, and so he calls his chief of all of the astrologers, and the guy put in charge of all of the astrologers and all the soothsayers and all the magicians was a Jew boy they called Daniel. His Nebuchadnezzar called him Belshazzar, but his actual Jewish name was Daniel. And he wasn't an astrologer or a soothsayer or a magician. He was just a prophet of God. And so he says to Daniel, what does it mean, Daniel? What does this great vision I've had mean? So pick the story up in verse 19, halfway through. Belteshazzar, that is Daniel, answered, my lord, if only the dream applied to your enemies and its meaning to your adversaries. The tree you saw, which grew large and strong, with its top touching the sky, visible to the whole earth, with beautiful leaves and abundant fruit, providing food for all, giving shelter to the wild animals, and having nesting places in its branches for the birds. Your Majesty, you are that tree. You have become great and strong, and your greatness has grown until it reaches the sky, and your dominion extends to distant parts of the earth. So what we learn about the tree, it's a figure for a kingdom that has grown huge. That's what it means. So when Jesus was talking about it, it meant the same thing, a kingdom that's grown really big. From a tiny seed, grown real big. Same with this guy, Nebuchadnezzar. His him and his kingdom has grown huge. Your Majesty saw a holy messenger, verse 23, coming down from heaven and saying, cut down the tree and destroy it, but leave the stump bound with iron and bronze in the grass of the field. While its roots remain in the ground, let him be drenched with the dew of heaven. Let him live with the wild animals until 7 times pass for him. And this is the interpretation, verse 24. Your Majesty, and this is the decree the Most High has issued against my lord the king. You will be driven away from people, and you will live with the wild animals, and you will eat grass like an ox, and be drenched with the dew of heaven. And 7 times, that's 7 years, will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all the kingdoms of the earth, and gives them to anyone he wishes. To anyone he wishes. So God is saying, actually, I'm the king of every kingdom on the earth. I rule. I put whoever I put into power. We have Boris Johnson, don't we? And we elected Boris Johnson, or the majority of people did. But actually God has allowed him to be in power. And only God. And think of any other kingdom that you want to think of. Who's the president of the United States? Kids, one kid for a point.
Wait, what?
It's not anymore.
What did he say? Yeah, no.
Bear.
Yeah, Biden. Whatever his name is. Biden. Joe Biden.
Right over there, Joe Biden. Well done.
Can I just ask then, why did God let Donald Trump be?
We'll find out. Who knows? So, Joe Biden,
Maybe it was
put
just,
in power by
tree
God.
that
And it says even the lowest of people, or in the old Bible it says even the basest. So Adolf Hitler allowed to be put in power by God. And you think, why would God do that? But God knows best what he's doing. Let's read on the story. Verse 28, jump to verse 28. All this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. 12 months later, as the king was walking on the royal palace of Babylon, he would have been walking through the famous Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. All this happened. He said, is this not great Babylon that I, the king, have built as a royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty? He's kind of got a bit carried away with himself, hasn't he, this guy? He's starting to believe his own hype. Even as the words were on his lips, a voice came from heaven. This is what is decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your royal authority has been stripped from you. You will be driven away from people and will live with wild animals. You will eat grass like an ox. 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all the kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he wishes. Immediately, what had been said about Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled, and he was driven away from people, and he ate grass like the ox, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven until his hair grew like feathers of an eagle, and his nails like the claws of a bird. Imagine that, you're a bloke, you're living out in the fields. He goes so mad that he's living out in the field, and when it rains he gets wet. He's completely bonkers. His hair grows, and it goes to dreadlocks, and it just looks like long feathers. And his nails, nobody cuts his nails, so his nails grow long like claws. The guy just would look weird, wouldn't he? And that was the king of the whole world at that time. He was a top man. And God said, cut it down. Cut it down. Cut that big tree down. Because, why? Because he had become proud in his heart. He says, look what I've done. Aren't I great? Aren't I the best? Aren't I wonderful? I'm just up the same level as God I am. And God says, no, you're not. Down you go, boy. You're ready for a fall. You're going to take a fall.
Or maybe he just was saying, I am better than God.
Even that he could have been, yeah. So he gets.
That's what you get, cut you down to size.
You got cut down to size. At the end of that time, that's 7 years, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes towards heaven, and my sanity was restored to me. Then I praised the Most High, and I honoured and glorified him who lives forever. And the history of Babylon at that time tells us that there was a king who went mad. He was mad for a season, and then he got better. His name was Nebuchadnezzar, and his son, which is Belshazzar, not Belteshazzar, but he was the last king of Babylon. And the last king of Babylon saw all of Babylon destroyed. And if you go to Babylon now, it's in modern day Iraq. It's just a wasteland in the desert. It really is. That whole tree utterly cut down, finished. So now you know what the symbolism of a big tree with birds in it and giving shelter to the animals is. What is that symbolism? What does it symbolize? Somebody. What does the big tree in the Bible with lots of birds, and what does it symbolize?
Humanity?
No.
Tree of life. The tree of life.
No. I said it earlier. This is a revision.
Jesus.
No. Big tree. What does it symbolize?
The world.
Begins with a K.
Kingdom.
A kingdom. King- Big tree symbolizes a kingdom. Who said kingdom first? Matt. Point to Matt. Well done, Matt.
I've already got a point.
So when you see big tree in the Bible, it symbolizes a kingdom. Okay? And particularly when it's a very tall tree and birds live in it and animals get shade under it, that's a symbol for a kingdom. So let's jump back to Matthew, where Jesus is talking about a kingdom. And he's talking symbolically about it because he's talking about a tree. Please don't play up. No, it hasn't played up. So let's read that again from Matthew 13 verse 31. There's only 2 verses. Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed which a man took and planted in his field. And though it is yet the smallest of seeds, yet when it grows it becomes the largest of garden plants. It becomes a tree so that the birds could come and perch in its branches. So Jesus is talking about whose kingdom in that parable?
Kingdom of heaven.
Yeah, the kingdom of heaven. So in Daniel we read about the kingdom of Babylon, but in Matthew we're reading about, you get a point by the way.
Share that
I
one.
got a point.
Yes,
Share it.
the kingdom of heaven. What is the difference between the kingdom of Babylon and the kingdom of heaven?
The kingdom of heaven lasts forever.
Yeah, and
The kingdom on the ground is destroyed.
no. That's a good point. That's a good point. I'll give you a point for that because the kingdom of Babylon was destroyed. But so that is one difference, but it's not the difference I'm looking for.
But the kingdom of heaven is everlasting.
Yeah, but it's actually right in the beginning of verse 31.
I can't think.
It's a little thing.
Mustard
Mustard
seed.
seed.
Seed, a mustard seed. Yes. I don't know.
You just gotta give us hints.
Paula gets a point for that. It's the mustard seed.
I have one point.
The difference, the kingdom we read about in Daniel, yeah?
What is the kingdom?
Jesus' kingdom doesn't get destroyed though.
No, he's talking about the one that did get destroyed.
Yeah, I did give you, that's right, you did get a point
He's
for that.
asking
So.
how did Babylon.
How did it, can we do that afterwards? Yeah, because it's not part of what I'm talking about. But I will tell you.
Vegetables.
Now you've got to remind me where I was. Mustard seed?
Yeah, and the kingdom of heaven.
Difference, 2 differences. 1, the kingdom of heaven doesn't get destroyed, it's everlasting. 2, it starts tiny, like a mustard seed. Yeah? So, yeah.
It starts like a tiny little ant colony.
Hey, what?
Like an ant colony.
Ant colony, right, okay. So, we're just few here. But the kingdom of heaven is here. And so we will become great. Because Jesus is with us. And he's growing us. So we grow as people, we grow in number, we grow as a church. And yeah, but listen to what Jesus says about that growth process. Jesus says this. He says, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Jesus says this. I, Jesus, will build his church. Okay, so even though it starts as a grain, tiny grain of mustard seed, King Jesus is constantly nurturing it, watering it,
And it's growing.
fertilizing it, growing it in each one of us, but also as a body. And it has become the biggest church in the whole world as a Christian church. It's the biggest church by far in the whole world. There are other churches, there's the Islamic faith, there's Hindus, but the biggest one by far is Jesus' church. And one day when he comes back and establishes his kingdom fully on earth, it will cover the whole earth. There will be nothing else but the kingdom of Jesus. Okay? And so, those things in the parable, what do you think the little tiny seed refers to? The little tiny seed refers, what do you think that refers? That's a hard question.
To faith.
Yeah, it says to faith and
Faith.
faith is small.
Yeah, faith, it's good, but faith in what?
Faith in God.
Faith, yeah.
Faith in the Lord.
And one specific thing, faith in his word. So when Jesus says, I will build my church, the gates of hell will not prevail against it, then that's his word, and you can take him at his word. So even when it looks really bad and everything's collapsing and it doesn't look good, God is still in control. And that was a lesson that King Nebuchadnezzar had to learn, wasn't it? He had to learn that God's in charge. Even if the whole thing gets cut down and you have to be like a madman in a field for 7 years, and your hair grows wild and your nails grow wild and you just live out in the field eating grass, even then God's still in charge. God's still in control. And that's the comforting thing that we have to learn. God is in charge. God is in control, and he's growing his kingdom even from the smallest seed of his word. When his word is mixed with faith, it starts to grow, it starts to do stuff. And that's what we have to always continually remember, that it's the word of God that prevails, and we just have to have faith in him and his word. And a big tree will eventually grow from it. Might take a while. Might take a while. But God is doing it. God is doing it, yeah. Amen. I will never leave you or forsake you. For no reason shall I turn away any who come to me, says the Lord. Yeah, well, give him a point. Okay, let's close in prayer. Lord, I thank you that we've had time to worship together today, time to hear your word. We thank you, Lord, that you're with us. We thank you, Lord, that even when it looks like everything's been chopped down, chopped from underneath us, that you're still there, still growing your kingdom. And that your word, even when it is as small as a mustard seed, when it is combined with faith and watered, then you will grow it into a mighty great big tree, your kingdom. So thank you for that, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
And I'm standing on a rock of ages, standing on a rock of ages, standing on a rock that'll never change. No, he'll never change. Never change.